Alina, can I just confirm that I'll see participants come in correct when they move from the main room? Is similar to similar to physical health. And so unfortunately, we do use mental health and mental illness interchangeably, but this is a positive state of wellness and flourishing. And it's something that we all want and need and actually have to kind of work towards, something that we need to pay attention to. So the other thing about mental health is it is really defined as the balance of the mental, the physical, the spiritual, as well as the emotional. So it's not just about feeling good or having positive thoughts, but it really relates to a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a sense of meaning, and really helps us to look at how do we deal with life's ups and downs that come our way, which we certainly know during this time, there have been many challenges that people have been faced with. So it's important as parents to understand, how do we know as parents or guardians when we should be concerned? And what does that look like? How do we recognize when more support might be required for our children? And so really when it kind of moves from mental health into mental health problems, we start to look at things like when it starts to interfere with our daily activities or our child's daily activities. We look at things like the duration, the length of time where our child might feel a certain level of distress. We look at the intensity of the emotions, and we also look at when things are different than what we would expect. So for example, I would say through this time, there is an expected level of discomfort that everyone is struggling with. However, for some of us, for some of our families and our children, certainly that level is even beyond what we would expect, even in these challenging times. So really, the most common mental health problems are things like anxiety, depression, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the causes for those can be related to predisposition. So maybe we have a family history. It could be environmental factors. There's much research to really help us to understand all of that. One of the ways I like to talk about mental health, however, is the dual continuum, because I think that, again, mental health is more than just the absence of mental illness. So our mental health changes over time. And so you can have poor mental health without having illness. So certainly, as I said, many people are experiencing stress the last number of years. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a mental illness. The same is also true that we do have people that have a mental illness that also have good mental health. So again, we know that the most common mental health problem is anxiety. Many people live with anxiety and have a really good mental health, especially when they have a network of support around them as they kind of move through this time. So why is it so important to talk about mental health and wellness in schools? Well, we know that achievement and well-being are really interconnected, right? When we feel well, we do well. So we know that schools are an ideal place to promote mental health. We certainly know that we can do some really intentional learning in our classrooms around social emotional learning, do that explicit teaching to build those skills that we know that our children need. We also think there's an opportunity in schools for educators, just as adults at home, to model what does coping strategies look like? How do we integrate practices into our day-to-day life to keep our mental health positive? We also know that educators are really key to kind of notice concerns, notice changes, just as you are at home, and to offer those services and create those supports and ensure that we can create those pathways to care for students within our system. So when we talk about mental health within the education system, we think in tiers. So this model really describes kind of the continuum of supports that we have within our school board and in others. So in tier 1, it's mental health promotion. So that is good for 80% of students are really well within that mental health promotion. And we know that truthfully, this is good for all students. It's really about laying the foundation, laying the conditions for mentally healthy schools and classrooms. We know that at the tier 2 level, that second blue level that you see, that's really about kind of prevention and early identification. So for some students, we say about 15% of students need a little bit extra in terms of skills and support to kind of reduce the risk factors and to build, again, it's more targeted skill development for those students. And then at the tier 3, we're talking about supporting a few students with diagnosable mental health problems. And so for those students, we know that they do need more significant support, treatment, and ongoing care, and sometimes that bridging to community services as well. What we certainly know that all students need at school is that connection to caring, responsive, genuine adults. We know that having a place where they feel connected and included and a sense of belonging will help all students' wellness and mental health. We also know that having someone notice when things are challenging and reaching out and connecting with them, and not just connecting with them, but really listening to what is happening with them and believing what they tell and then acting on that information is what we know that all students need. So we talked about kind of that tier 3 intervention. So we do have mental health supports in our school. We have psychology staff as well as social work staff that work in our buildings. We also have itinerant educational assistants that do some work in that tier 2 level that I was talking about previously. So typically you will see in a high school, we'll have about a full day of psychology or social work services to support students. We also, as I said, have those itinerant educational assistants who will do 2 days in a high school and offer supports through those services. Some of the services that students could receive are things like assessment services or a review of the findings of psychological assessments within the community. And so helping schools to support and integrate the strategies and recommendations into that classroom. We do a lot of consultation, so consultation to address concerns around individual students, around classrooms, around learning difficulties. So really collaborating with those that are working within the school system to support students' needs. Certainly, parent collaboration is key for us. So really having us a better understanding, you know your children best, so being able to kind of speak to you, connect with you to better understand how can we work together to meet your students and your child's needs. Certainly, our psychology, social work staff do counseling intervention. It is based on evidence-based approaches of cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-focused school support, and certainly collaborative problem solving as well. And then we do a lot of interagency networking. So really collaborating with community partners, coordinating with agencies to ensure that we're really developing and supporting comprehensive supports for students. We also really heard from students themselves that they really want to access social workers with shared lived experience. And so we have developed some positions within the school board to really meet the unique needs of students within certain communities. And so we do have 4 social work staff members dedicated to these positions. We have 2 social workers supporting the Black students and communities and families, 1 social worker supporting the Indigenous community, and we have 1 social worker who supports the 2S LGBTQ+ community. So those supports are accessed through the school social worker. We also have graduation coaches and equity coaches, and I know that there is another workshop, I'm sure, that will speak to the other resources we have within this board, because we certainly are committed to the success and belonging of all students within our schools. So how do we access mental health supports? So how to access mental health supports in high schools goes through the school guidance counselor. So if you do have concerns around your students' mental health and well-being, that would be kind of the first stop, is to have that conversation with them. Alternatively, the school's principal or vice principal administration also can help you to access those pathways. We do have regular meetings within our schools as a multidisciplinary team, so psychology, social work, itinerant educational assistants, guidance counselors, administrators, to look at how do we best service and support the needs of students. Certainly within our system, the students themselves can also self-refer for psychology and social work and supports. And so they have to be 16 in order to sign for themselves to request that support. We have been really focused on what can we do from a prevention aspect. And so we are running a program called Wellness Matters. It is a 2-session program and is really about mental health literacy. How do we get students to really understand how to take care of their mental health? We also have really talking about how do we help to link them to mental health services if they need it, because what we are hearing from children and youth a lot is that they don't know where to turn to when they are struggling. So we want to make sure that that's really clear for them. We also have many community partnerships that we have established. And certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just a starting point of some of the partnerships that we have developed over time. So as parents, it's really important. You play an essential role to supporting the mental health of your children and youth. And so certainly it can be challenging to talk about mental health. But sometimes, sometimes students themselves our children will avoid those conversations, but really kind of just starting to talk about what you're observing, check in with them. Hey, I've noticed lately you haven't been as a talkative, or you have looked a little bit more sad. Is that how you're feeling, right? Just share kind of your wonderings, ask, check in, don't make assumptions about how they're feeling. We know that certainly teenagers don't like to hear that very much. So how do you create space though, to allow them to talk? I think as adults, we also rush to fix things for our children. We want to kind of help them and make them feel better. So, but really creating that space just to kind of listen and be present for them is really essential. And certainly we would really encourage you to reach out if you have any concerns. We are absolutely here to help. There are many community resources that are also available to students and families. And as I said before, we work in close partnership with many of them. So we would encourage you to explore these if you are looking for supports for your child or have concerns. So if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. And otherwise, I wish you well in your other workshops. Good night. Hello, welcome. My name is Emily Bala. I am the mental health lead for the district. I'm really happy to be here with you tonight to talk about mental health and wellness as your child transitions to high school, which I know can bring many feelings, some excitement, some nerves perhaps. And so wanted to talk to you a little bit about mental health in general, and then what some services are that we can provide within the board. So I will go through a presentation, and there will be time at the end if you'd like to put some questions into the Q&A. So before I begin, I just wanted to kind of talk about what is mental health in general. What does that look like? Because I think that there isn't really a solid understanding of what mental health is. I think that mental health is something that everyone has, and it's similar to physical health. And I think that often mental health and mental illness are actually confused and kind of used interchangeably, when in fact mental health is a positive state. So it is a state of wellness, it is a state of flourishing, and it's something certainly we all want and need and want for our children. And something that we need to pay attention to. Just as we take care of our physical health, we certainly need to take care of our mental health as well. So mental health is defined as the balance of the mental, the physical, the spiritual, as well as the emotional. And so it's not certainly just about feeling happy thoughts or thinking happy thoughts, but it's really about a sense of belonging, sense of connection, a sense of purpose, and really that ability to kind of cope with life's ups and downs. So certainly it's something that we want for ourselves as well as for our children. So I think it's really important to know, though, when we need to be concerned. So what do we need to look for, and how do we know when something might become a mental health problem? And so really what we pay attention to is the level of intensity of the feelings that our child or ourselves are having. We look at the duration as well, how long it has been going on for. We look at the level of interference, so how it kind of gets in the way of us participating and taking part in daily activities. And also we look at, a different response than we would expect. So for example, if you're going through a stressful time, as this has been for many, there are some things that we maybe can expect, whereas really we're looking at kind of out of proportion with what we would expect was really when we start to have concerns and need to kind of follow up and check into it. So one of the ways that I really like to kind of understand mental health and mental illness is using a dual continuum. And I think that it's important because mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. And mental health changes over time. So you actually can have a mental illness, but also have good mental health. So for example, we know that anxiety disorders are the most commonly diagnosed mental health problems. And so people, however, can do amazing, wonderful, have beautiful lives and function very well despite that diagnosis. And so the other can also be true, however, you can have poor mental health and not have a diagnosable mental illness. So just kind of having a better understanding of those two things, I think, goes a long way and really also helps us to kind of move beyond some of the stigma that we face. So why is it important to talk about mental health and mental wellness in schools? Well, we know that achievement and well-being are really linked together. They're really interconnected. We know that schools are ideal places really to promote mental health, where students can learn skills around social emotional learning, around recognizing emotions, around kind of coping with stress. We also know that it's an opportunity for where educators can notice signs, can intervene, offer services, and really get those ongoing supports for students, which is really, really important. In fact, research has really shown that school-based mental health intervention designed universally or targeted ways by schools can reduce students' experiences of mental health problems later on. So really important piece. When we look at mental health within our schools, we think of it in tiers. So we use the Aligned and Integration model through School Mental Health Ontario. And so this model really provides a continuum of supports and services based on student needs to create kind of supportive environments where we know that students can thrive. So we look at kind of the tier one, and during tier one, we're really talking about mental health promotion. We're looking at what is good for all students. And then we're looking at the foundation, the conditions for learning that we can create in classrooms in our schools. We know that 80% of students, that is perfect. That's actually what they need. There's about a 15% group, however, that really need a little bit more. And so that would be that tier 2, where we're really building skills, where we're doing a little bit more targeted intervention, and we're really looking to kind of decrease those risk factors that may be present for certain students. So that would be the tier 2. And then the tier 3 is something that is required for about 5%, 3 to 5% even of students. And that's really support for a few students who do have diagnosable mental health illnesses and really need that extra support. And whether that's through our mental health professionals or also those pathways and supports to getting care within the community. So certainly we know all students need relationships. The most common denominator for well-being is relationships. So really we do a lot of focus within our district of how do we create authentic, genuine, compassionate relationships with students, and how can we ensure that we're being responsive to their needs. And really getting to know them at the core is so key to that. So making sure that there is someone there that notices when something's wrong, that is reaching out, someone who believes what they tell them, and then kind of, again, can link to those supports as required. So when we look at what are the mental health supports within our district, and specifically when we look at in our high schools, we do have psychology staff, social work staff, and we do have itinerant educational assistants that all do some level of mental health work. So typically for our psychology and social work staff, they would be in a high school a day a week on average. That can change a little bit depending on the site, but on average, they would be about a day a week. And then we have itinerant educational assistants that do more of that tier 2 work, that skill building that I talked about, and they would be in high schools 2 days a week. Some of the services that our staff would be offering would be things like the psychology staff would be doing, they could offer psychoeducational assessments, or even reviewing the findings of other psychology assessments that have been done to really work with the school to support how do we integrate the strategies and recommendations provided. We certainly do a lot of consultation working with educators to address kind of concerns around mental health, around behavior, around learning difficulties. How can we support around those pieces so that students can have positive experiences at school? Certainly, parent collaboration is key. We need to work with parents because you know your children best. So how can we work together to learn about your children and what they need within the school? We do a lot of crisis intervention, certainly. So all staff are trained in suicide intervention. And certainly the goal is to absolutely provide that immediate support, to collaborate around safety plans, and they again, make those links to community supports as needed. We do offer counseling. Typically, they would be short-term counseling. They are based in evidence around typically based in cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-focused school support, and things like collaborative problem solving. And we do a lot of work with community organizations. So how do we collaborate and coordinate with other agencies to ensure that we can get that comprehensive support for students? The OCDSB is certainly committed to supporting the success and belonging of all students and recognizing the historic and ongoing discrimination experienced by certain communities. We certainly have heard from students who identify as Black, Indigenous, or part of the 2S LGBTQ community, have indicated at times there is a preference to receive therapeutic support from a social worker that comes from the same community. Having that shared lived experience certainly can increase safety and connection. So we do have 4 social work staff members dedicated to these positions. So we do have 2 social workers supporting the Black students and families. We have 1 social worker supporting Indigenous students and families. And certainly we have 1 social worker who supports the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And so those are all accessed through the school social worker at the high school. So in general, how do you access mental health supports within our high schools? So certainly guidance counselors are a wonderful first step to indicate if you have concerns about how your student or your child, I should say, is doing, or your child themselves kind of feels that they need to talk to someone. A guidance counselor is a beautiful first step, and they do a wonderful job at making links to our mental health professionals. Certainly speaking to the administrator, the principal or vice principal about what is happening and what your concerns are also would be an important pathway. We work together as a multidisciplinary team. So our mental health services team, the guidance, the administrators, learning support teachers at the school to kind of wrap around students and come up with a plan that would best support their needs. In terms of counseling support, students can self-refer when they turn 16. So as a 16, they don't require parental consent. However, under the age of 16, all students would require parental consent for our involvement. We also know that mental health promotion is really important. So we have a program in grade 9. Typically, it's in grade 9 in the high schools, although some other grades have been also receiving this program. It's a 2-part program, and it really focuses on mental health literacy. So understanding what mental health is, recognizing the signs when stressed, and some coping strategies, and really specifically also focuses on what are those pathways to care. So if you are really struggling, where can you go? What are the services? Because we've really heard loud and clear from students that they don't always know where to turn to. So we want to make sure that all students have that information. We are fortunate to have many community partners that we work alongside. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but kind of gives you a sense of the many organizations we are fortunate to work alongside. We know your role as parents and guardians are key. Talking about mental health with your children can be difficult because sometimes they are not interested in having these conversations, but really finding time to kind of check in, sharing your observations. Hey, I've noticed you've been a little bit quieter lately. I'm just wondering how you are. Do you want to talk about it? You know, share your wonderings and not making assumptions about how they're feeling is really key, especially for teenagers. So just really taking that time and that space to have the conversations with them. I think one of the other things we do as parents is it's really hard not to try and come up with ideas and advice to kind of fix things. And sometimes really we need to just slow down and just kind of listen and be in it with them. It can be really hard as a parent, certainly, to stay there. There's some great resources as well online. I'd encourage you to look at School Mental Health Ontario. They have some wonderful tip sheets on how to kind of engage in these conversations with your child. There are many wonderful community resources as well. So I have listed just some of them that can be available to you and your child. If you have questions or concerns, I'd certainly encourage you to reach out. So at this time, I'm done the presentation. There is only, I recognize, 1 minute, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A and I will do my best to answer them. And if you don't, then I hope you have a wonderful evening and thanks so much for joining me. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. I am Emily Balla. I am the mental health lead for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board, and I'm really happy to be here with you tonight as we talk about mental health and wellness and that transition to high school. For someone who just had a child that started high school last year, I certainly know the very many emotions that come with the transition to high school, certainly some perhaps excitement, also likely some nerves. So happy to talk to you about what some of the supports and services are that we offer through our district. So to get us started, I did just kind of want to make sure that we had a shared understanding of what is mental health, because I think that's such an important starting point. So certainly mental health is something that everyone has, just like physical health. I think that often people confuse mental health and mental illness and use those terms interchangeably. But the reality is that mental health is a positive state of wellness and of flourishing, and it's something certainly that we all want and need for ourselves as well as our children. Just like just like physical health, I should say, we certainly need to work at it though to keep ourselves well. So mental health is really about that balance of the mental, the physical, the spiritual, as well as the emotional. And so it's not just about being happy and thinking positive thoughts, but it also relates to a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose and meaning. It relates to a sense of optimism, as well as that ability to kind of cope with the life's ups and downs that kind of come our way. So again, clearly something that we want for all of our kids. It is really important, however, to also know when do we have to be concerned about our children? So how can we recognize what the signs are when we need to start worrying or we need to start reaching out for supports? So really, what do we look at when we're looking at kind of mental health problems? We look at the level of interference it has in our child's or our own daily activities. We also look at the duration that it lasts, how long it is happening for, as well as the intensity of the distress experienced. We also look at things like, is the response different than we would expect given the circumstances? So those are all things that we kind of keep in mind when we look at mental health problems. So often it can be used mental illness, mental health problems, mental health challenges, but really they describe difficulties in coping and in functioning. The most common mental illnesses are anxiety and depression. So I really love the dual continuum model because it talks about the fact that mental health is more than just the absence of mental illness. Mental health changes over time. So you can have poor mental health without having illness. We know that certainly many people are facing stress over the last few years, both children and adults alike. And so certainly these are not typical times. These are not expected times. So certainly some level of discomfort and challenge would be expected. However, we need to know, again, going back to those duration, intensity, frequency, those are the things that we need to look at when it is beyond what would be expected. The other thing that we need to consider is that you can have a mental illness, to diagnose mental illness, but also have really positive mental health. So anxiety, I had mentioned before, is the most common mental illness. We also know it is the most treatable. So certainly having the right supports in place, a community around you, absolutely people can have just a wonderful life and a really good mental health. So why is it so important, though, to talk about mental health and wellness in schools? Well, we know that schools are ideal places for mental health promotion. We know that we can promote social emotional learning, we can promote skill development, we can embed regular practices, educators can model just as adults can model for students. How do we deal when stressors come our way? What does that look like? What are the practices we engage in to help us through? It's also really helpful because we know that educators can really notice signs early, offer services, and certainly provide some ongoing support as well. So we know actually the research does say that school-based mental health interventions delivered universally or in targeted ways by school staff can reduce students' experiences of mental health problems later on. So when we talk about mental health services and supports, we think of it in terms of a continuum in schools. And so we think in tiers. And so the tier 1 is kind of that bottom green piece, and that is really about mental health promotion. So that we know is good for all students, all people, in fact. That really lays the foundation and sets the conditions for mentally healthy classrooms and school environments. The blue is that kind of tier 2. So at that tier 2, we're looking at, maybe 15% of students need just a little bit more. So I would say 80% at the bottom, about 15% at that kind of tier 2 level need just a little bit more skill development to decrease those risk factors and bolster how they're going to kind of manage stress. And then there's the tier 3. And so the tier 3, that purple piece, is really supporting a few students who have diagnosable mental health problems. And so those are students that do need more support. And I'm going to talk in a minute about what are some of the supports that we have that can help to provide that care. But all students, we know, need absolutely relationships. And so we focus on this a lot in the board. It's certainly the strongest common denominator for well-being is relationships. So having a connection to caring, responsive adults, having a place to feel a sense of belonging and feel included. Really, I think at the core, it is having relationships that are grounded in compassion, genuineness, responsiveness. So listening to students when they tell you something, responding to them, and taking time to really know and see them is really key, we know, to mental health. So what are our mental health supports? So in all high schools, we do have a psychology staff member, social work staff member, and itinerant educational assistants. Our psychology and social workers, so our mental health professionals, are there on average about a day a week in each of our high schools. We also have itinerant educational assistants, so they really work at that tier 2 level that I just described. So they do kind of mental health promotion, prevention work. And so they're in our high schools 2 days a week. Some of the services that our mental health professionals provide would be things like consultation is a big part of their role. So consultation with educators around how do we address concerns related to individual students? How do we support in the classroom? How do we support around learning difficulties, behavior, etc.? An absolute key piece to this is parent collaboration. So we know that you know your children best. So how do we work together to really understand your child's needs and to support them moving forward? Certainly, our mental health professionals also do a lot of crisis intervention. So all of our staff are trained in suicide intervention. And so our goal is really to provide that immediate support, collaborate with families, create safety plans, and then link to community resources as needed. We also do counseling supports, and those are evidence-based interventions that usually we're using things such as cognitive behavioral interventions, emotion-focused support, and collaborative problem solving. And also we spent a lot of time with that interagency networking. So really collaborating and coordinating with other agencies to support and to provide comprehensive services to children and youth. So certainly the OCDSB is committed to supporting the success and belonging of all students and recognizes the historic and ongoing discrimination experienced by certain communities. We have heard from students that ensuring that there is mental health access from folks that have had shared lived experience is really important to look at how to better service the unique and meet the unique needs of students within certain communities. So we do have 4 social work staff members that are dedicated to these positions. We have 2 social workers supporting the Black students and families. We have 1 social worker supporting Indigenous students and families, and 1 social worker who supports the 2S LGBTQ+ community. So those social workers, those staff members can be accessed through our assigned school social workers and have been a really key supports, certainly to students and families in our system. So if you do have concerns around your child's mental health or well-being, we encourage you to reach out to the guidance counselor at your child's high school. They're a wonderful resource to you and certainly can be a pathway into some of the mental health supports that we have to offer. As well, you have your administrators, your principal and vice principal, so certainly reaching out to them to let them know if you have any concerns. We certainly value the communication and collaboration working with you so that we can, again, support your children through this transition. As mentioned, we do have multidisciplinary teams. So we have all those staff that are working tightly with guidance counselors, administrators, learning support teachers, student success teachers, really again to ensure that that our students are having the best experience they can in our schools. I did want to let you know that certainly for counseling support, that students who are 16 and up can self-refer, so they can request counseling support through our mental health professionals. I also wanted to take a minute to share with you one of the programs that we are running in our high schools. So there is a program called Wellness Matters, and it is a two-part program where it is teaching students about understanding mental health and mental wellness. It is about talking about stigma and what are some coping strategies to manage stress, as well as looks at pathways to care. So who are the people that they can reach out to and talk to as needed? And we think this is really important because what we have heard over and over from students is we're not sure. I want to talk to somebody, but I don't know where to go. So we feel that this program is really important for students, and it is geared towards grade 9s. So you may have your child kind of talking about this program that they have been a part of. We are really fortunate in the OCDSB to have many community partnerships. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but gives you a bit of an overview of some of the community agencies that we are working alongside, and certainly value these partnerships as we support students and families. We know that talking about mental health and mental health challenges with your child can be challenging. Certainly, I think talking with teenagers in general at times as a parent can be challenging, but we know that you have such an important role to play in supporting your children. So really just finding that time to check in with them, sharing your observations with them. Hey, I've noticed you've been a little bit more quiet lately, wondering what's up. You know, just coming in without assumptions, but creating that space for them to talk is so essential. And also listening without kind of the aim to fix things. I know as adults, we hate to see our kids struggling, certainly. And so how can we just kind of create space to have these conversations? So again, I want to say, please reach out to your school if you have any concerns. We really want to walk alongside you and work through this together. And encourage that collaboration. There are many community agencies in the city that also are available to support you and your family. So we have listed just a few here, and also encourage you to look at our website. If you go to OCDSB Mental Health, there also are lots of not just community resources, but if you look at the Parent at a Glance, we have many of our previous workshops that we've delivered that you can find there as well. And so with that, if you have any questions, certainly I would be more than happy to answer them. I think we are just almost at the end of our time, but more than happy to stay back with you. If you have anything, you can type it into the Q&A. And if not, I hope you have an absolutely fabulous evening. Thanks for joining. It looks like there's no questions coming through. So again, I will wish you a wonderful evening, and please reach out to your schools if you have any concerns at all. We're happy to be there to support. Good night, everyone.